Hello, I'm Dr. Jared Allsop from the School of Public Health, Bloomington, Department of Health and Wellness Design. I'm grateful to be here at the Facet Annual Retreat as a finalist in the Innovate Awards for creative use of online tools. I want to talk about a series of online tools that I've used in my SPHY 561 Social Psychology and Recreational Therapy course. This is an online graduate level course for individuals looking to become recreational therapists and work with individuals with disabilities. I noticed that my students were having a bottleneck. They were getting caught up in one topic early in the semester, and it was impacting their growth throughout the rest of the class. The bottleneck they were stuck with was understanding implicit bias. They could understand it academically, they could understand it in the world, they could see it in other individuals, but they could not see it in themselves when it came to working with individuals with disabilities. And this bottleneck was preventing them from understanding the issues we were talking about in class. I decided to take an assessment of my students. I had them read 3 different articles talking about implicit bias. They would talk about what is implicit bias, how do we overcome implicit bias, and how does implicit bias affect therapists in their work with their clients. I would then ask them the simple question, do you have implicit bias against individuals with disabilities? And 100% of the students in my course said, no, I want to work with people with disabilities. Of course I don't have bias against them. They could understand again what implicit bias was in others and academically, but they could not see it in themselves. So I had to go back and decode what was going on and help them understand that everyone has biases. To do this, I brought in a series of online innovative teaching strategies to help them truly understand what implicit bias was and how to see it in themselves. After doing the online Canvas journal articles and having a discussion, I would have my students go and take the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. This is a scientifically peer-reviewed, highly reliable, highly valid test to study somebody's implicit bias. Looks at a number of different populations, and I had my students specifically take the one on individuals with disabilities. Overwhelmingly, almost all of my students came back as having a bias against individuals with disabilities. The students had to take a screenshot of their test results and submit it. Then they had to go onto our Canvas discussion page and answer a series of questions. I would have them talk about what is implicit bias. I wanted to make sure that they truly understood it. Then I would have them talk about how do they feel about the results? Do they agree? Do they disagree? A lot of the students would then say something like, the test was wrong, it was inaccurate. Then I would say, well, assuming the test was correct, how do you explain your results? And now that you have your results, what will you do differently? Following these online discussion posts, they would view a pre-recorded VoiceThread lecture talking in depth about implicit bias, how it impacts us as therapists, and what they can do to overcome it. We would then participate in a live Zoom session where we would have everybody come into the class. We would discuss the results. We would talk about interpretations of results. We talk about how to overcome that implicit bias that we have and the benefits of knowing that we have some bias. I would then have the students break out into Zoom breakout rooms. They would all have the same Google Doc forms, and then they would work together to compile all the information they've learned to develop treatment protocols for overcoming implicit bias. And so this sequence of teaching strategies allowed me to bring in multiple different online tools to address this bottleneck that we were having. We used online journal articles, we used Canvas discussion posts, we used VoiceThread lectures, we used Zoom sessions and Zoom breakout groups, we used Google Docs, we used the Harvard Implicit Bias Test, and brought all these different areas around to really have the students increase their engagement and address this bottleneck of implicit bias that was stunting their ability to learn and grow in class. After taking the implicit bias series of active learning strategies, I asked my students again, do you have implicit bias against individuals with disabilities? This time, it changed from 0% that said yes to 61%. 61% could identify that, yes, I do have implicit bias. In closing, here are some final words that my students identified. One of the things I like about this most is it caused them to really reflect on their own bias and how it impacted them as a therapist, and it saw growth in them both as a person, as a student, and as a therapist. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate being here at the Facet Retreat. Have a wonderful day.